As part of SpecialtyCare, we want to welcome everybody. This is the first time we are celebrating National Apprenticeship Week, and we are very excited within SpecialtyCare to be able to do so. We want to be able to say thanks to each of you for taking the time to learn a little bit more about our training program. We have gotten a lot of support from the Department of Labor and really have enjoyed being able to participate in the National Apprenticeship Program. And it's exciting for us to be able to kind of show off some of our apprentices, show off some of our educators, and to be able to introduce everybody to our recruiting team. So I think without further ado, why don't we get into things? It looks like we have a few folks on, Julie, and as people come in, I think they'll be able to catch up with us.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And just another welcome from me. So exciting to see so many people interested in learning more about our training program in intraoperative monitoring. So I am going to get us started here by showing our agenda for this afternoon. So in terms of what we're going to go through, we are going to start off, of course, with some quick introductions and a brief lecture by Christina Young regarding just what is IO&M, what exactly is this field, what's it all about, what am I getting myself into? And then following that, we will have an introduction to the actual specialty care training program. So how it works, how it's laid out, and what really you can expect. After that, we will speak with our recruiter, Brittany Dickinsky, and she is online with us already. And so we just want to offer you an opportunity to ask any questions that weren't covered in the previous two sessions, and really just to pick Brittany's brain, so it doesn't have to be a real structured formal question. You can just go ahead and ask anything that's on your mind. And then after that, we will meet some of our recent graduates. So we have with us Seth Knack, and we also have Sophia Klein. And of course, we handpicked some of our strongest, best students that made it through the program with no issue. And I think they can speak very well to some of the challenges and obstacles they face in the program, as well as some of the benefits and, rewards that they've seen in this experience. And then lastly, we are going to do a Meet the Educators session where Christina Young and myself will talk to you a bit and answer any questions that you have. So please notice that in the Zoom, you can answer your questions in the Q&A. And so feel free to just enter those questions throughout the session, and we will be sure to get around to those either after the lecture sessions or during the Q&A sessions. All right, so we can go ahead and get started. I am going to turn it over to Christina. Christina, are you able to share your screen, or do I need to stop sharing?
I'm able to share my screen.
Oh, go for it. Perfect.
Okay, you can see my screen, correct?
Yeah, it looks great.
Awesome. All right, so my name is Christina Young. I'm the Director of Clinical Development here at SpecialtyCare. So I am one of the educators of our SN1 training program. And I'm just going to start by explaining, what is intraoperative neuromonitoring. So best way to kick it off is know what you're here for, right? So let's talk a little bit about this. So maybe one day you're in the operating room and you look into one of the rooms and you see someone planted in the back corner behind a computer. And you're wondering what this person is doing. You just see them back there staring at a computer screen. So I think one of the most common remarks that the candidates make when they interview to be a surgical neurophysiologist is, they'll tell us, wow, I never heard of this career before. And when so-and-so told me about it, I was just amazed. So let's delve into what that human in the back corner is actually doing. Intraoperative neurophysiologic monitoring is the use of electrophysiologic methods to assess, monitor, and map the function of the nervous system structures in order to improve surgical outcomes. So if you hear the word nervous system and you're thinking brain, spinal cord, and nerves, well, then you're definitely on the right track. In the image here on the left, we're looking at a meningioma, which is an intradural spinal cord tumor. In the middle image, you'll see a nerve sheath tumor in the cauda equina. And on the image on the right, you're seeing an X-ray taken after a scoliosis correction. All of these procedures rely heavily on intraoperative monitoring for the best patient outcomes. So I say improve patient outcomes, and you're thinking, how would that be accomplished? So what we do is identify and map neurologic structures. We detect impending neurologic compromise, which sometimes we can intervene and cause reversal of these events. And that in turn will prevent iatrogenic injury. Iatrogenic means an illness, or in our case, a deficit that's caused by medical examination or treatment. So what monitoring methods were utilized prior to the discovery and use of electrophysiologic methods? This was actually quite unpleasant for the patient. So it was something called a Stagnara test. So basically the patient was woken from anesthesia during their procedure or surgery, asked to move their arms or move their legs or respond to commands. So you can probably imagine that being the patient in that OR, having to do something like this while your back is cut open wouldn't be one of the most pleasant experiences of your life. So with intraoperative neuromonitoring, we can assess all those pathways, and the patient can stay under anesthesia and not have any of that terrible experience to put in their brain. All right, so who benefits from IONM? So let's delve into how each party benefits. So the patients benefit, the surgeons benefit, and hospitals benefit. So the patient, for the patient, we're going to see an improvement of the surgical outcomes and a decreased risk of neurological deficit. And again, like we talked about on the last slide, this will be an alternative to the Stagnara test. So patient stays asleep, and all of this testing is done without them even really knowing what's going on. The surgeon. So the surgeon's also going to benefit because they're getting some real-time monitoring and feedback on the patient's central and peripheral nervous system. So as one of the things that we can do is verify placement of instrumentation. So this will take away their guesswork. So there's more technology that's guiding their decision-making. And then, of course, there's going to be less post-op deficits. So for the surgeon, that's a lower chance of getting sued. So it reduces their exposure to malpractice litigation. The hospitals, how the hospitals benefit. Intraoperative neuromonitoring is cost-effective to the hospitals. Reduce risk of complications. So as part of hospital metrics, the surgeons want good outcomes, but so do the facilities. And good outcomes, less patient deficits means shorter hospital stays and a shorter length of procedure. So it gets those patients in and out of the hospital and not having to return. So, intraoperative neuromonitoring, working as surgical neurophysiologists, you have to be part of a team. And there's a big part of this career is teamwork. So IONM is only effective with teamwork. The neurophysiologist must be a part of the surgical team, and the team must accept and trust the clinician in order to provide the best degree of care. So our communication must be both timely and accurate, and their cooperation must be timely and effective. IONM teams may be structured differently, but all teams include neurophysiologists and overseeing readers. The billing structure reflects this team structure, as there is a technical fee and a professional fee. So the intraoperative neuromonitoring professional who is in the hospital each day will leave a bill for the hospital with a technical fee, and the patient is billed a professional fee. In our case, the overseeing reader is online, so we abbreviate that as RNP, which stands for Remote Neuromonitoring Professional. And this person must be a physician, audiologist, or a DABNM in most of the accounts. Preparing for intraoperative neuromonitoring. So before you can perform IONM, you must answer 3 questions. What is the procedure? What are the structures at risk? And what modalities can help protect those structures? So as surgical neurophysiologists, you are a very big part of the procedure, and you use a lot of clinical competence to make decisions each and every day. So the role, the surgical neurophysiologists arrive at the hospital 1 hour prior to the procedure start time. The first thing that the surgical neurophysiologist does is go into the operating room and set up the equipment, open up the software for charting and open up the software for running the program, converse and plan with the surgeon, go to pre-op and assess the patient, and converse and plan with the anesthesia team. Lastly, connect and discuss the plan with the remote oversight. So in the operating room, the first thing you do is set up your equipment. So the I-O&M equipment consists of a laptop, a base, amplifier, stimulator boxes, and recording boxes. With the exception of the laptop and the base, the equipment is placed on the operating room bed. Electrodes are used in every case, both to stimulate and record. A few different examples of electrodes are subdermal electrodes, surface electrodes, handheld probes, and gold cups. So here in this patient, you'll see a very typical setup, perhaps for scoliosis or lower lumbar procedure. And these are subdermal needle electrodes that are placed in the muscles. And you see that there's a lot of wires. So there's a lot of jokes in the operating room about how we decorate the patient. These little circular things here, those are the sticky electrodes, and or the surface electrodes that we often use to stimulate nerves. Next, after setting up the operating room, we'll head on over to the pre-op area. We'll meet the patient, introduce ourselves first, then obtain informed consent and assess the patient by reading his or her chart, asking questions, and performing sensory and motor exams. After setting up the equipment in the room and after seeing the patient and then speaking with the surgeon to develop an I-O&M plan, we head back to the operating room. There's a multitude of intraoperative monitoring modalities that we perform depending on the location of the surgery and the structures at risk. So here are just a couple of common modalities listed. The SSEP test, this will test conduction from the peripheral sensory nerves through the spinal cord to the brain. MEPs test conduction from the motor cortex of the brain, down the spinal cord, and out to the peripheral nerves. EMG provides information about peripheral nerves, and triggered EMG is useful to test those peripheral nerves, which will help to guide placement of surgical instrumentation. EEG provides information about the frequency and power of brain waves. And BAEPs, brainstem auditory evoked potentials, assess the vestibular cochlear nerve, which is the cranial nerve that allows us the ability to hear. Lastly, Train of 4 is a test we use to assess the amount of muscle relaxation that the patient may have on board. This modality is important for us to validate some of our other tests. The first modality I will touch on is somatosensory evoked potentials. This modality represents sequential activation of the neural structures along the somatosensory pathway, is elicited by stimulating a peripheral nerve, most commonly a peripheral nerve at the ankle or wrist. It generates a response recorded from the somatosensory cortex of the brain, and it monitors sensory pathways of the limb, posterior spinal cord, and sensory cortex. So here's a quick overview / animation of what SSEPs are and what they can tell us. So we'll start with stimulation of the left ulnar nerve at the left wrist. So right here, you'll see the anode and cathode placed over the patient's ulnar nerve. We will apply current to the electrodes, sending an action potential up the peripheral nerve, where we will then record a peripheral response on our computer screen. The action potential continues into the spinal cord, where we'll record a cervical potential. The action potential continues by crossing over the medulla, traveling up to the brainstem and the thalamus, and then eventually landing at the lateral somatosensory cortex. That is the cortical response on the screen. So after we've obtained all of these responses and have troubleshot to get nice, strong, robust responses, as good as the patient's nervous system allows us to obtain, we will then save that as a baseline. So a baseline is saved before incision, and new responses are obtained throughout the procedure and compared to that patient's baseline. And in the event of a change from baseline, we alert the surgeon, and we'll use deductive reasoning to help determine the insult. So here are some examples of intraoperative changes in which we would alert the surgeon. So here, stimulation at the ulnar nerve is recorded at the peripheral potential. We're recording it at the cervical channel, but we see a very clear change here in the cortical channel. And this is indicative of right cortical ischemia. In the next example, we're stimulating again at the ulnar nerve. The peripheral potential is remaining at baseline, but we now see a change in both the cervical and the cortical potential, which would lead us to deduce that there is a spinal cord injury. And in the last example, you'll see that there's a change in all three of these potentials. So we see a change in the peripheral, cervical, and cortical potential. And this could be indicative of an infiltrated IV or a poorly positioned upper extremity in which the arm becomes ischemic. All right, the second modality I will touch on is motor evoked potentials. This modality provides information about the motor components of the nervous system. This modality is typically recorded from muscles following transcranial stimulation, though we can also record from the spinal cord. MEPs monitor primarily the anterior or motor portion of the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerve roots. So here's another animation, and we will look at some left muscle MEPs. So unlike the SSEPs and where we stimulate over a peripheral nerve, for motor evoked potentials or MEPs, we stimulate over the motor cortex of the brain with an anode and cathode. So upon stimulation, so here you see that the action potential came from the patient's right side of the brain, traveled down the internal capsule of the brain, crossing over the medulla, down the spinal cord, and out to the peripheral muscles. And of course, you'll notice also that we are recording from the contralateral side of the body from where we're stimulating. So here we have motor evoked potentials, all of the muscle groups that we've recorded from: the deltoids, the hands, the quadriceps, the tibialis anterior, and the foot. So once we've obtained those baselines, we will set those baselines and obtain new responses throughout the procedure and compare to baseline. So here are some examples of intraoperative changes. So in the first example, you see that the patient has what's likely a thoracic spinal cord injury. So we're still obtaining our motor evoked potentials from the deltoid and the hand as they're above the site of injury, but we lose motor evoked potentials from the muscles of the lower extremities, which are below the surgical site or the site of injury. In the next example, what we're looking at is a brachial plexus injury. So you can see here in this example that we've lost motor evoked potentials to both the deltoid and the hand. So we've lost upper extremity potentials, but we're still able to record responses from the legs just fine, as this is not an issue with the patient's spinal cord. And in the final example, what we're looking at is a very specific nerve root injury to one of the nerves that innervates a muscle in the leg. And this example, this is the tibialis anterior. So you'll see a reduction, not a complete loss here, but a reduction in the motor evoked potential or the CMAP that's recorded from the tibialis anterior muscle. And we would still alert the surgeon in this situation. A 50% change in the MEP amplitude is part of the alert criteria when we are looking at individual nerve roots. So the deficit a patient may wake up from this type of injury is a foot drop. The third modality I will touch on is electromyography. This modality is used to evaluate the electrical activity in skeletal muscle that can infer damage or irritation to peripheral nerve roots, so the trunk, limbs, cranium. It can be spontaneously recording, which we call free running, or elicited via electrical stimulation. As we can also perform triggered EMG, where we stimulate nerve roots or pedicle screws, and we record responses from the muscles innervated by those nerves. And of course, I have an animation for this one as well. So this is a much more simple modality to kind of comprehend and digest. But this is really what we're seeing when there's direct nerve root irritation. So here you'll see as the surgeon is decompressing and that kerosene is kind of moving around in there, that here we have some EMG firing from the tibialis muscle, which tells us that that nerve root specifically is being injured. Now, this modality doesn't give us any information about the prognosis of the patient, but because we know this nerve root is irritated, we can alert the surgeon so that he or she knows their proximity to the nerve root and can kind of back off and let it cool down. And again, does not necessarily mean that the nerve root is damaged. So while our purpose as surgical neurophysiologists is to monitor the nervous system, that often brings us to cases that are not just in the neuro category. Surgical neurophysiologists are a common sighting on neuro, ortho, ENT, and vascular procedures. All right, and that is it for introduction to what is intraoperative neuromonitoring.
Yay, awesome. Thanks so much, Christina.
Let me go ahead and unshare my screen.
Oh, that's okay.
Or you can just take it back, I think. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was awesome, Christina. Thanks for that introduction. Really kind of a brief overview of all the basic, like, major modalities that we monitor. I did get one question in the Q&A, so I'm going to go ahead and read that one for you, Christina. In the meantime, to all of our other attendees, if you have any questions, really anything at all throughout all of these sessions, you can feel free to type your question in the Q&A. If you are in an actual Q&A session and we're actually, primarily just doing Q&A, you can at that point also raise your hand and we can unmute you to ask your question verbally if that's what you prefer. But certainly for the lecture sessions, just type in your questions as we go. All right, so Christina, this first question, how do you generate a baseline? How do you even get a baseline if the patient comes in with an injury that, is inhibiting that patient's potential? So if the patient comes in with a paralysis or comes in with a sensory deficit, how can you even get baseline data in order to monitor the patient? It's a great question.
That is a really great question. So the first thing I'll preface with saying is that for any given procedure, we are monitoring more than one modality typically. And a patient who comes in with a spinal cord injury or a nerve root injury, depending on how bad that injury is, sometimes we can still monitor one part of the nervous system while not being able to effectively monitor another part of the nervous system. So in the slideshow I just showed you, we talked about two very common modalities, one being somatosensory evoked potentials or SSEPs, and another one being motor evoked potentials. Now, one of those modalities traverses the anterior portion of the spinal cord. The other one traverses the posterior portion of the spinal cord. And both of these systems relay different type of information. So the motor evoked potential pathway, bringing motor information from the brain out to the muscles, whereas the somatosensory system is bringing information about proprioception, discriminative touch, from the periphery to the brain. So, in a patient who is completely no longer neuro intact, maybe the spinal cord injury is so severe that they've lost all sensation, they cannot move their limbs at all. Sometimes we are called into those procedures to see if we can get anything for baseline, even though it's not expected. So that is one reason we can be used. Another reason is that surgeons might be looking for an improvement in signals and kind of just wanting feedback about what the nervous system is looking like in that moment. And we see this often with trauma cases. But again, like I said, sometimes we may be able to get motor evoked potentials, maybe not from all muscles, but we get something, and we're able to set a unique baseline for that patient and then monitor and give the surgeon feedback to basically help guide the surgeon into not making matters worse for the patient. And that's kind of the role we can provide on those cases.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I would also just add to that, from a cellular level too, that we have so many millions, really billions of neurons in the central nervous system that even when several of those are compromised, several of them are still uncompromised, So sometimes with electrophysiology, we can kind of force, something down a pathway that may also be partially injured in the sense that it's, presenting clinically. So yeah, really cool stuff. One more question for you, Christina. Can you suggest, and actually I could answer this one too, and maybe Cheryl too. Can you suggest any papers or books for us to study in getting into this subject in more depth?
Yeah, this is a question that a lot of candidates ask us prior to coming into our field as well. What are some things that I can do to be prepared to come into the field of intraoperative neuromonitoring? And I think what we usually provide as an answer is just making sure that your platform on, neurophysiology in general, how an action potential, works, all of that kind of introductory to neuroscience is just not necessarily that you have to be, perfectly well versed, because a lot of us do forget a little bit of this topic after college, but getting your feet wet and kind of immersing yourself in it again. And we usually recommend Coursera has some really, really awesome courses. Introduction to Neuroscience is phenomenal, and it's free. If you can take the free course online and really learn a lot to just get yourself prepared for coming into this field.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and go next and say I was going to grab the books to show you, but there's one text by Augie Moeller. He's a very well-known, kind of big name in our field. So Moller, Augie Moeller. And if you just kind of type in his name into Google and say, intraoperative monitoring Moeller, there's a textbook that's very, very common in our field, and you can kind of take a look at that. Now, understand you asked for more depth, so they do get much deeper into things than really kind of just learning about the superficial level stuff. Another text that I could recommend is by Delitis and Shills, and it's called Intraoperative Neuromonitoring. So that's a bit longer text, but again, these textbooks, they do have some very introductory chapters, but there's only a couple introductory chapters. After that, it really starts to kind of get into the weeds. So you might just want to, kind of take your time getting through all that. Any other suggestions?
No other suggestions, but I was going to say that, Julie, we could send the resources out to the folks who are in attendance, since we know who is on, and that way can at least send the, I'm having a brain fade right now, like the DIN number, or at least the kind of the citation for the books that you reference. That way they know exactly which ones you're talking about.
Excellent. Yeah, we have your contact info, and really any questions that remain unanswered, we'll certainly want to circle back to you on. Great. All right. So next on the agenda, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. We're going to shift over to the SpecialtyCare IOM training program. So I think this is my turn here to present to you guys.
All you this time, Julie.
All right. Okie dokes. So once again, for anybody just joining us, we're going to start talking about the SpecialtyCare training program. If you have any questions, just shoot them in the Q&A, and we'll get to them in just a few minutes. So first of all, welcome to SpecialtyCare, right? SpecialtyCare is not just an intraoperative monitoring provider. Specialty Care does offer several other service lines as well. So we are a large provider of perfusion services, as well as what we kind of group into surgical services. So aside from those, we offer neuro services. Now, within the neurodiagnostics services that we offer, we've got EEG, transcranial Doppler, evoked potential studies, deep brain stimulation, and of course, intraoperative monitoring. And so, of course, what we're focusing on today is the IONM service line. So now let's look a little bit deeper about Specialty Care really as an employer within the IONM service line. So why is Specialty Care kind of the best in intraoperative monitoring? So what all of our services really have in common is reducing risk and reducing costs for the patient and for hospitals. So the reality of modern healthcare is that, regulations, risks, liability, and financial burdens are increasing. Physicians are being asked to do more with less. Hospitals are being tasked with demonstrating value, balancing costs and quality. So when the drive to bring down costs and increase revenue is, really weighing on them, they can have this sort of temptation to cut corners on quality, and that can be a bad thing, right? So, whoopsie. So Specialty Care professionals, swoop in, right? And we provide support in highly specialized procedures, and hospitals can be more efficient without cutting those corners. So our business model is to develop these long-standing relationships with hospitals, and we focus on, transparency and showing our partners how we're improving their ORs. Our primary focus is always the patient, and at the forefront of our company is, our highest quality patient care. So that's really our only focus. That's our only sales pitch. So through these practices, we advocate for excellence in surgical outcomes because that's what our patients deserve. Now, you want to work for a company that, you believe in and that you can be proud of, right? So we have to touch on our values. That's where our values come in. Our core values are reflected in everything that we do, in our annual goals, our performance metrics, and in the overarching culture of our organization. So first, integrity. We are compliant. We follow the rules. There are no shady business practices, no flying under the radar. We can always feel great about the services that we provide and the way that we do business. Sense of urgency. Everyone in the organization is expected to work expeditiously to resolve issues. And that plays into, not only our efficiency, but also respect for one another in the workplace. So our support teams, think about, biomed. If you have something that breaks, you need a support team that's going to respond to you efficiently and, with that urgency. Teamwork, of course, always looking for opportunities to collaborate with colleagues and customers. And of course, we have to work as a team every day in the operating room. And then continuous improvement is a staple of providing good healthcare and staying on the cutting edge of best practices for our patients. So we're constantly looking at our metrics and how we can improve them. There are a number of factors that set us apart from other IONM service providers. A few things being our measured quality, our quantity of surgical neurophysiologists and patients. We are the largest provider in the US. Patient care is all that we do. It's the center of our approach. And so it's not only our priority, but it is what we focus on. Like, as we mentioned earlier, it's not only our first priority, it is what everything kind of centers around. And we're always compliant. We don't, like we said, try to fly under the radar. So sometimes these things are very, different in our field, in the competitive landscape, and really can set us apart. I mentioned our IONM service line is quite large. We're in 42 different states. I know Brittany gets asked a lot of questions about where where do we have IOM services within specialty care, and where can we provide training? So there's a lot of different places to answer the question quickly. And we offer online clinical interpretation and technical support to all of our staff throughout, those 42 states. So our physician group works alongside our neurophysiologists as sort of a two-part team approach for every single case. We collect over 80 different data points on each procedure that is monitored. The surgical neurophysiologist is entering information as the procedure is going on. And we use this information to track our internal quality, as well as to help out our hospital partners and surgeons to track their metrics as well. We can also use the data to really improve the field of intraoperative monitoring. Think about what it means to be the largest IOM provider in the nation. Kind of have a responsibility to do the right thing and help to push the field forward. Our team has published more than 55 articles in peer-reviewed journals, and we're often asked to present all the time at these large national conferences and national societies. Our internal database is trademarked and we call it Scope. So that's kind of where we dump all the data, and we can pull from that data as well. So with each and every patient care episode, we collect information about what happens in the case, gets dumped into Scope, and then from Scope, we can pull information to publish in the peer-reviewed literature. But we can also use that information to provide information to the hospitals and our surgeons. We can also use it to improve our own stuff. Like, okay, this is where we were last year, and just to show that we're getting better, or if we're getting worse, we need to focus on improvement. So always data, and having that measurable stuff allows us to focus on our continuous improvement. So here's a quick example of how specialty care can use the data that we collect during patient care to measure quality improvement or make comparisons based on national benchmarks. So here we're looking at the deficit rate of new onset injury following procedures that were performed nationally. So that's the blue line. You can see that trend seems to be kind of growing as the surgical volumes grow as compared to the new onset injury rate within specialty care, which is the green line, which is much lower and aren't experiencing such an increase, even with increased surgical volumes and expansion of the surgical procedures as well. So, really just highlighting here that surgeries can go on with or without specialty care monitoring, but the patient's ultimately safer when specialty care is in the room. All right, so how does our training program work? Well, we've got this 12-month training program framework. And so it fits over that first year of employment. So when we accept individuals to come train with us, we extend an offer and hopefully they accept our offer, and it is an offer for employment. So that's a question that we get a lot of times is, will I be employed after I finish training? Listen, you are employed the day you start training, okay? And so we are training people to work for specialty care. That's really the goal. We consider the first 8 weeks of training to be the fundamentals course, where we really focus on laying a solid foundation to build upon. So during this time, students take 2 different week-long trips to Nashville. We have a ton of fun in Nashville at our field office for hands-on classroom work, demonstration, and we also absolutely love to utilize our simulation operating room. So I do want to show you an introductory tour of our SimOR so that you can kind of get a feel for what it's like in there. Now let's see, let's make sure my computer's going to work and not fail me here.
Hey guys, it's Julie. Thanks for joining me here for a tour of our simulation operating room. Our SimOR happens to actually be dab smack in the middle of our office building here in Nashville. So come on. So here we are. So this is the simulation OR where we do a lot of our introductory foundational clinical training. We do a lot of work with the technical setup, introducing the IONM equipment. So here's an example of IONM equipment sitting on what we call a prep stand. These are typically just kind of hanging around in a typical operating room. Just like a typical operating room, we also have an OR bed. This is a real OR bed here. And of course, we have a donee just kind of laying here under the sterile drapes. So this is a typical stimulator box as part of IONM equipment. And this is a typical recording pod. We also just have lots of other pieces and parts of any typical operating room, like the OR overhead lights, NATO stand, suctions and blood collection buckets. We've got a hotline, which is a fluid warmer. There's actually a kind of an older X-ray box here for looking at different X-rays. Another prep stand. We do also provide sometimes some didactic learning here in the same space. So just in case you need it, we've got our whiteboard, and then we've also got a monitor over here. But usually we'll use our more classroom environments for didactic learning. Just gives us a little more space to kind of stretch out in. I also wanted to show you some of these other pieces of equipment, which are commonly used for transfusion training programs. These are cell savers. So basically, anytime surgery is performed, of course, there is some degree of blood loss. And when surgeries have more blood loss, sometimes the patient needs blood returns to their body. And so rather than relying on the blood bank for donated blood, what the cell saver does is using the suction from the surgery, it collects blood from the patient during the surgery so that it can basically centrifuge and collect the healthy red blood cells to be delivered right back to the patient. So it's a great alternative to using blood. So that is one training program that SpecialtyCare also offers as part of a different service line. We also have a huge service line in perfusion, and so we have the latest and greatest heart-lung machines. We have real anesthesia carts, and as part of our minimally invasive surgical service line, we have a lot of these towers and monitors for laparoscopic surgery. So lots of different training happens in this amazing environment. There is one last thing that I also wanted to show you. In addition to providing more technical training in this environment, there are some really fun, cool, role-playing type training that we can do. So watch this. When we need it to, the simulation operating room can feel very much like a real OR. So when we're doing our communication simulation, role-playing, pretending to talk with a surgeon and communicate an IONM alert, it's really important to simulate this environment the best that we can. So we kind of dim the lights and use the realistic OR lights. We wear scrubs, hat, and mask, and we do everything and role play everything just as if we were delivering a real alert to the surgeon. There's one last thing that I wanted to show you before we leave this MOR. And that is this poster that serves as a reminder to our students of our culture in this room. And that is that mistakes are going to be made during the training process, of course. We expect that. We respect those mistakes, but we do inspect them and we do correct them as well. So thanks for joining us. And I hope you have a great introduction to the SpecialtyCare apprenticeship program today.
All right. That was our, oopsie. That was our introduction and tour to the SimOR. All right, so what happens after the first 8 weeks of training where you've kind of just gotten your feet wet, you've kind of gotten the foundation. So following the first 8 weeks, we then are going to focus solely on clinical training. So each student is assigned a clinical instructor who will be part of your local clinical team. And that's really the main point person who is responsible for your clinical training. So they provide hands-on training in the OR, and eventually they'll kind of take a step back while they're still in the OR, but they'll kind of take a step back so that they can assess you as the student begins to develop more independence. And so finally, at some point, usually between 3 and 5 months of training, the student will be deemed proficient for monitoring only some limited types of cases. So they can monitor those types of cases independently while continuing their training, both didactic and clinical. And in the third phase of training, around 9 months into employment, we begin the National Board Certification Prep Series. So we thoroughly prepare our students for that board exam. We take 10 weeks to do this. And honestly, you may have seen other elements out there for board preparation for the CNIM. Not sure if you've seen that yet, but honestly, it's just not reasonable to think that you can fully prepare for an exam like that in like a weekend session. So our program takes a full 10 weeks to really get this immersive prep going. And because our students are set up for success from their foundational training, they tend to get through that 10-week process with no problem. So we're currently sitting at a 97% first-time pass rate, and the national pass rate for that exam fluctuates between like 60 to 80%. All right, and then just comparing different training programs in intraoperative monitoring, this really influences the pathways toward board certification. If you're part of a university-based accredited program, obviously those programs, because they're university-based, they do charge tuition. They're not an employer, but those can be a great option for people who maybe haven't completed their bachelor's degree yet, if their university offers a program like that. To be clear though, once you've completed a program like that, most of those programs don't get you the full number of cases that you need to become eligible for board certification. So the vast majority of those programs require that you would then become employed in order to get your case experience and then sit for your board exam. Some other allied health programs don't have the CAHIP accreditation and just have the formal recognition. Some clinical providers, provide training without any recognition at all in our field. And so those individuals would, if they have no previous neurodiagnostics experience, and they're attending a non-recognized, non-accredited program, they would have to just rely on their bachelor's degree as well as some online credit hours in education to become board eligible. SpecialtyCare right now, we sit with formal recognition by ABRET, so we're here in Pathway 4, and so that's how we can allow for, and provide board eligibility to our students. So what do we require as part of our training program? We do require a bachelor's degree in life sciences. We do also make sure that all of our new hires have strong interpersonal communication skills. So if you have started the process of applying to our training program, you may have experienced that you have had either a lot of phone conversations already, or maybe even some Zoom meetings, and that's because we find it, very critical to make sure that our new hires are good communicators. If you think about what we do in the operating room, really, if you can't communicate, you could collect all the beautiful data you want and analyze it all you want. If you can't communicate it with the surgeon, then neuromonitoring is really ineffective. So of utmost importance here. Also, we prefer individuals who have some sort of a demonstration of interest in neurophysiology, whether it be in academia, or maybe you've done some shadowing. Neuroscience or other health sciences is great in your background. Not a requirement, again, but it does strengthen your application. And then, of course, patient care experience. As I mentioned over and over, specialty care is very much patient care centered. So we want to make sure we're hiring people who have patient care as their sole interest. All right, our clinical career pathway affords recognition and promotion to associates who choose to continue their clinical growth and development. So promotion requires that you maintain your continuing education. It requires, moving up up our career ladder requires that you also continue your competencies, your clinical competencies. And the upper rungs of the ladder even require graduate education, which, we provide $1,500 a year for continuing ed, and that's to help, renew your certification. Every 5 years, the CNIM has to be renewed. But we also offer tuition assistance for ongoing education. There are a lot of benefits in our organization to help you move forward with your professional growth and development. And just notice that our clinical ladder, our clinical path is separate from our leadership path. So that means, and this is very important to me, and to I think many of my colleagues, that means that, if you're not necessarily someone who's interested in leadership, maybe you're not interested in being a manager of others, but you're just passionate about working in the operating room and growing your clinical expertise, that means that you still have, all of those, abilities and opportunities for professional development. So it's not like you have a cap, a glass ceiling, just because maybe management and leadership is not for you. So I love that about our organization. Also notice that our entry-level surgical neurophysiologist on the career ladder is what we call SN1. So that's our training program. That's why we call it the SN1 training program. All right, if you're thinking this might be a good next step for you, if you still like us after all that, please get in touch. We want to hear from you. Even if you're still in college trying to figure out, what's the right path for me, I'm not sure if this is it. Hey, it's never too early just to get in touch. Start getting your questions answered. So you can reach out to us on social. This is a code for our website, our webpage, and you can submit an application on our webpage, or of course, reach out to the lovely Brittany Duginski if you haven't already. She's our dedicated training program recruiter, and she's going to be up next to speak with everyone. And so we'll have a Q&A with Brittany next. So I guess I'll pause here and ask for any questions before we start with Brittany. Remember, you can raise your hand or just put your questions in the Q&A. Okay, we have one question about research. If we have the opportunity to work as a research assistant in a lab, what types of labs do you recommend to help prepare? Oh my goodness. I think working as a research assistant is an excellent opportunity in like data collection and learning. You may be able to learn some statistical analysis type software. I know that, some of those old research type, what am I saying? The research type coursework and experience that I had in college. I know some of that kind of comes back to me in my current work, but I will say that working in a lab just is not the same as, actual healthcare and actual clinical environment. So I don't know that it quite matters as much as to specifically what type of lab. I don't know if anybody else has input about that, you guys. What kind of lab?
No, I would agree. I'm not sure. Well, I absolutely agree with what you said for the data collection and things like that, and having just that good understanding. But one type of lab versus another type of lab, I'm not sure I do have an opinion on that. I'm sorry, my nose is. Hopefully you guys can hear.
I know I've had a few friends in the past work for different types of like cardiology research labs, and you're still studying, action potentials, you're still studying neurons and muscle cells. And so I think it's all very relevant. So anything that you can tap into that you can even draw a dotted line to the relevance would be really cool. But even if it doesn't, I think it's still valuable with the research experience.
Any more questions came in, Julie?
Yeah, I think one of the questions really pertains to Brittany, so I'm going to let her get started and we can answer that one for her or in her session. And then somebody asked about if the presentation late, and so yes, we will have a recording, and anybody who's joined the presentation, we already have your contact information, so we'll be sure to share that with you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started with Brittany. Brittany is our dedicated IONM recruiter. I am going to hand it over to Brittany. Brittany, why don't you give a brief introduction, and then of course we have our video to get us started with.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Brittany Dujinsky, and I am the IONM training program recruiter here at SpecialtyCare. I have actually been, excuse me, I've been the recruiter for the program now for a little over 2 years total with the company. Next month, I actually hit my 3-year anniversary with SpecialtyCare. So, woo! So yeah, I'm excited, and if I see a few familiar names in here, so hello, and it's probably nice to get a face with the voice and the name, as we probably had several conversations, and then I see some new names as well. So looking forward to getting to know you all if this is something that you are interested in. But yeah, happy to answer any questions. But I think, yeah, Julie, like Julie said, we've got a video to kick it off, and then I'll jump into some questions.
All right, great. Here we go. Well, that's not the way it's supposed to work.
Hey guys, I'm Julie Trott, director of our IONM training program here at SpecialtyCare, joining you from our simulation OR. I am here with Brittany Dujinsky, our SN1 IONM training program recruiter. And today we are going to be discussing some of the most frequently asked questions that Brittany gets asked by our IONM candidates who are looking to join our training program. So Brittany, welcome.
Thank you.
And yeah, so why don't you just kick us off and shoot the questions at me, and I will do the best I can.
Okay, perfect. So first question that I get a lot of, are candidates going to have the opportunity to choose what locations they want to train in?
Right. Yes. The answer to that is absolutely yes. When we extend offers for employment, those offers are for specific teams. And of course, those teams are in specific geographic locations. So for example, if we were to extend someone an offer to join the Atlanta, Georgia team, that team covers plenty of different hospitals around the greater Atlanta market, the metropolitan area. And so that individual would be expected to live in Atlanta. They would be training in those hospitals. They would be training in Atlanta, and then they would continue to, join the Atlanta team and continue to work on that specific team.
Thank you for that. So my next question that I receive a lot are, what is the best way for somebody or for a candidate to come into the program? What's the best way for them to help prepare them for the program itself?
Yeah, great question. I think ultimately the most important thing is for the candidate to understand how the program works, understanding, the stages of the program, what it's all about. You can look at our website for that. There are videos, there are Q&A on the website as well. So find out as much information as you can about what to expect and what the expectations are in the program, because this is a huge investment. It's a big step. And so we just want everybody to be completely fully prepared, and we are always very transparent about all of that information. Now, also, we have questions a lot of times from candidates or even from new hires about how they can academically prepare before they start on day one. And so I would say, review basic neuroscience concepts that can be found really on the internet or in any like basic biology book or basic neuroscience book. just the structure of a neuron and depolarization and excitatory and inhibitory postsynaptic potentials, these kinds of things that most people are introduced to during their college years. And some of those fundamental concepts kind of slip over time. Physical science, cubic centimeter is a milliliter, just basic things like that. And converting units, those types of things that you might need a refresher on. Of note, though, I do also extend a pretty comprehensive study guide to anyone that we do get accepted offers from. So probably 3 to 4 weeks before class starts, I do give a study guide to help people feel, most prepared. As far as OR experience, I know that it's pretty difficult for people to find shadowing opportunities, to be, exposed to the OR environment. And that's okay. We have a lot of people start in our training program who have never been in an operating room before, and we're prepared for that. We're prepared to introduce you to that environment and what to expect. So that is really fine. And I would also, though, say that any patient care experience that you can get as a trainee, going into this training program, having previous experience speaking with patients and caring for patients, and even just observing the patient care setting. So whether you can volunteer at a hospital or maybe just have, a part-time patient care role while you're in college still, I think all of those things are very valuable.
Awesome, thank you. So last question that I have is, what resources are provided to our trainees going through the program to help them succeed in the program itself?
Gosh, okay, yeah, there are tons of resources. Honestly, this entire training program is really designed to make our trainees succeed. My entire role as director of the program, I also work alongside Christina Young, who is director of clinical development. And so our entire role really is around helping our trainees succeed. And so we, provide all of the academic coursework. We also, just supervise the entire training process and kind of, keep track and coordinate and make sure everybody is reaching the milestones that they need to reach. We also do assign local clinical instructors to each SN1 who works with them on their clinical team, attends surgeries on a daily basis with them, also fills out progress reports and acts as really a liaison between the clinical team, the SN1, and the education department. Within the education department, overseeing the clinical instructors, we also have regional education coordinators. And so regional education coordinators touch base directly with SN1s once a month, kind of just, making sure everything's going smoothly, giving them progress updates. This is what we're seeing with your progress reports, et cetera, et cetera. And then I would also mention that SpecialtyCare, just as an employer, provides a lot of support toward education. One of the things is a $1,500 continuing education budget. So really anything that the trainee needs, and really even after the training program, ongoing continuing education, anything that they need to kind of stay abreast of the latest and greatest in clinical practices, and get their continuing education units to renew their certification. That $1,500 a year even rolls over, so if you don't use it all in 1 year, you're just getting more funds for the following year. So yeah, very important. And I think that's very unique in our organization. I think that's a really unique quality of SpecialtyCare that I really appreciate.
Good. Awesome. Well, thank you. That's all I have. So
awesome. Well, I hope that this was helpful to anyone considering applying to our training program. You know how to reach us, so reach out if you have any additional questions for us.
All righty. So we'll go ahead and begin the Q&A session with Brittany.
Perfect.
Right. So there are a couple questions came through. So the first question that I will read is, when is the next training class and how many do you have per year?
So currently our next class begins in January, and then year to year. So for 2023, we have tentatively 6 cohorts on our books. So one in January, we plan to have another one in February, and then another in April, June, August, and October. So I believe that totals out to be 6. But again, that's all tentative, but that is currently what is on the books for 2023.
The next question is, how long is the interview process?
So the interview process, it is a 3-part process. So the first interview will be an initial phone interview with myself, and then from there, you're selected to move forward in the process. That'll be a phone interview with one of our regional directors. And what that conversation really is about is for them to get to know you a little bit better, along with you getting to know them, along with the region or the location that you have an interest in. So basically gives you an opportunity to understand, the local area that you have an interest in a little bit better. So whether that be, if you have questions about like the team dynamic, what hospitals that we cover in those specific areas, what we've got open within, if you're open to like more of a broad region, what we have, just different cities that we have available within that region. And then a final interview is a panel interview that is done via Zoom. And that is typically conducted with Julie and Christina, and then one of our education coordinators, Tom, as well. So we include all 3 of them on that panel interview. And again, that's done via Zoom. So it is a 3-part process. And then after that, we make our selections.
All right. The next question is, what is the employment commitment after someone goes through the training program?
So good question. We do have a 3-year commitment with SpecialtyCare when you are in our program. So those 3 years does include your training year. So you have your training year and then an additional 2 years of employment on top of that to total out those 3 years.
Awesome. And then the very last question I see here is, does SpecialtyCare offer relocation assistance if I'm selected for an area that I need to relocate to?
Great question. Yes, we do. And that number is determined based off of the number of miles that you are relocating. So we take where you're currently at, where your offers to, whatever that mileage looks like in there, kind of determines the amount that we will provide you in relocation. So yes, we do offer relocation assistance.
Okay, and then there was a question earlier. I'm sorry, I had left it for this topic. Can international candidates apply?
So right now we are not equipped to be able to hire anybody outside of the United States. We do run into just some logistical and sponsorship hurdles that we have for the program. If that is something that you're interested in or have additional questions about, I'm happy to kind of discuss that more offline. But unfortunately, right now, that is not an option for us. We do hope that that does change in the future, though.
All right, I think that's all the questions that we have.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Well, of course, you guys, if you think of other questions or want to discuss anything further, you know how to reach out, and so don't hesitate. Moving on, we are going to not watch that video again, but we are going to start the Meet Recent Grads session with Sophia Klein and Seth Neck. So they are 2 of our recent graduates. As you can see, Sophia graduated in October 2021 and Seth graduated July 2022. And obviously we're very proud of them and invited them to come answer some of your questions. So I'm going to hand it over to Sophia here to provide a brief introduction. And then if you could just kick it over to Seth.
Okay, thanks, Julie. So yes, as you can see, I graduated October 2021 and I started in November of 2020. So I was able to do it in just under a year, if you're wondering about timeline. So I had a little bit more of an unconventional path towards the training program. So I actually attended college on an art scholarship for ballet. I graduated in 2019. So even though I really enjoyed academics in high school, ballet was always my main focus. But after graduating, I was at a bit of a crossroads. I wasn't really sure what direction I wanted to take my career. Both of my parents are physical therapists, and I really admire what they do, but I knew that that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. But I also did admire that they had a really great relationship with their patients. And ironically, that's actually exactly what led me to specialty care. So lucky for me, Christina Young, who is one of the directors of the training program, she was actually bringing her daughter to my mom for physical therapy while I was in high school. And so during one of their sessions, she came and she was wearing scrubs. So my mom was curious and asked her about her career. And Christina explained the whole training program to my mom, who immediately ran back and told me about it and was all excited. And I was in high school at the time. I was still focused on ballet. So it kind of was like in one ear, out the other. But then fast forward to graduating from college, for some reason, that conversation really stuck in my head. So I talked to my mom, we gave Christina a call, and from there, it just pretty much took off. She advised me on what gaps I needed to fill because I was a double major in college. So I did have psychology was my major aside from ballet, and I took some health classes, but I did have to fill in some gaps. And Christina was great about telling me exactly what I could do to help become competitive for the program. And like she mentioned earlier, I actually took 2 of those Coursera courses, and that really helped me a lot leading into the training program. My experience with the training program was really all net positive. I'm going to be honest, it was definitely challenging, especially because I didn't have a degree in biology or something that would have given me a lot more background. So I was really concerned about even being accepted into the training program. So that really motivated me to do a lot of extra preparation leading into it. I was really amazed by how much we were able to learn over such a short time span. And I really enjoyed this job. I'm grateful every day. And it's really special to be able to be such a part of an intimate experience for people that surgery is. Surgery can be really scary for people. And I often find that when we go and talk to patients just to pre-op them and let them know about intraoperative monitoring, they're pretty much always relieved. You either themselves or their family member that's with them kind of breathe this extra sigh of relief just to know that there's going to be this extra safety measure there. So all in all, it's been a really great 2 years, and I'm just really grateful for Christina, for SpecialtyCare. And yeah, I still learn more every day. But sometimes I find myself going back to like PowerPoints from the training program if I need to brush up on something. So that's about it for me. I'm going to pass it over to Seth now.
Thanks, Sophia. So I'm Seth. So I'm an SN2. I've been with the company about a year and a half. And just like Sophia, I finished the whole program just under a year. So back in July, I started in August of the previous year. So my background, my story is a little bit different. So I had a little bit more of the science sort of background, but not anything like really what I do on a daily basis. So I started with an undergraduate degree in basically personal training and did that for a while. That wasn't really fulfilling for me. So following that, I went ahead and pursued my master's degree in exercise physiology, thinking I was going to come out of that doing cardiac rehab. That never panned out either. So I continued on being a personal trainer. I started coaching CrossFit, became a head coach, enjoyed what I did, but it wasn't really what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to get into the healthcare and kind of move in a different direction of what I was doing. So that wasn't really making me happy. And I one day happened to come across a friend of mine at the gym, passing by in the locker room. Oh, what do you do? Oh, well, I do intraoperative neuromonitoring. It's pretty cool. well, what is that? I've never heard of that before, which is the same thing that I hear every time I tell somebody what I do. So he had kind of explained what he did. Wow, that's like really cool. How do you get into something like that? He said, well, I'm gonna help you out. And he referred me to SpecialtyCare and showed me the program. So I started looking into it more and more. I had no real patient care experience, so I knew I needed to get some of that. So I came across an opportunity and sort of switched gears with my career for maybe a year or so, 6 months, and was a project manager on some really unique projects that came about just basically because of COVID. So I was able to work at a small, sort of like a hospital that was set up for COVID patients, where we treated COVID patients who didn't need to be on a ventilator, but were on their way to recovery, but still needed to be in a hospital setting. So I worked there for a while, and then following that, I was able to actually work at several different vaccination sites and kind of see that side of things. And so following that, I applied for the program, got accepted. And my experience was a lot like Sophia's, so it was pretty much all positive. I mean, the instruction and all of the different ways they teach you throughout the program, prepare you, the way it's set up into different phases, kind of gives you everything you could possibly need to be successful, and definitely everything you could need to get your CNIM following. And that's pretty much my whole background.
All right, well, excellent. Thank you guys for that introduction. And if you didn't notice, I certainly noticed that in Sophia and in Seth's introduction, they describe kind of finding out about this opportunity as a bit of a fluke. You know, it's not a very well-known field. It's not something that's typically introduced to people as a career option during their undergraduate studies. So we're really trying to help get the word out, and the more you can help us spread the word, the better. So, you know, so happy for you guys to be here, you know, learning about our program, but also want to just encourage you to kind of spread the word as well. Okay, so we're going to start with our Q&A for our recent grads. We would love for you guys to enter your questions in the question panel. We would also love to hear from you if you want to just raise your hand and I can unmute you. So get those questions rolling. I do have a question already. So Sophia, I'll shoot this one to you. How much background experience, and I imagine this means like maybe how much experience in patient care, how much background experience did you need to have in order to get into this program?
Okay, so that's a really good question, because for me, when you first asked me that, initially in my head, I think I had nothing, but I had a little bit. I had done a lot of shadowing. It was of my parents, but I was shadowing, you know, patient to provider relationship. And then in college, I volunteered at the university hospital. So I volunteered in a few different departments, like the cardiology department and then the emergency room department. So I at least had some, you know, experience around patients, but I had never been in an OR before. So after that initial 2-week period, it was definitely overwhelming going into an OR. So I think it really varies on like how much you need in order to be competitive for the program, or a competitive candidate for the program. I think as long as you have something, but just similar to how like Seth and I have different backgrounds, as long as you have something, it might be a different manner that you have it, you know, volunteering at a hospital, however you have it, a clinic, EMT, however you're getting it done, as long as there's, I think, some kind of, that's definitely going to be helpful to you. But it's not black and white, as you know, there's nothing specific. That's something that's really great about specialty care, is that you can have such a, you know, unconventional background, and you can still make your way into the program and learn a lot during the program.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. We try as best we can not to really assume any previous knowledge, you know, so we try to give everybody all the nuts and bolts that they need to succeed. Cool. All right, so this next question, I'll shoot this one over to Seth. So what was the support system like as you were going through the training program?
That's a good question. So the support system, I'm thinking as far as what you guys were providing us during the program, which was actually a lot, probably more than I would have expected, because as you go through, of course, you and Christina kind of run different parts of the program, but no matter what part I was in, I could easily just reach out to one of you if I needed to. I also had Lexi, who I believe the regional education person for me down in South Florida. So pretty much those, and you also have your, to this day, actually, I still have my trainer, who, if I'm a little unsure about something, or I'm coming up on a procedure that I haven't done before, or I have questions about, I can simply text him or message him and say, hey, I'm doing this procedure. I'm not really sure exactly what or how I should be monitoring this part of it. And he always lets me know immediately any questions that I have. And then we even have other resources. So I feel like there's an abundance of support throughout the entire training program.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, whether it comes to, just advice, and just support for you personally, or, professionally, just advice. I think we have that level of support, but then, think about our physician group. We employ 50 physicians as part of our, remote professionals. So even if you had a very complex neuro question, we kind of have the full gamut of levels of support. So that's awesome. All right, another question. You know what? I have actually two questions that are kind of overlapping. So I think I'm going to smush them together and ask them actually to both of you guys. So Sophia, I'd love to hear your take first. And then Seth, I'd love to get your take on this as well. So the two questions are, how was your work-life balance? And then the other question was, how much time did you spend outside of the training program studying and doing assignments?
Okay, if it's okay, I think I'm going to start with that second question, because I feel like it's a little.
We can kind of talk about.
Yeah, merge it together. So, for me personally, I was able to spend, so I had someone in my cohort who was also in Orlando. So we were always kind of communicating in terms of what we were doing, and we both prepared very differently. So I liked to do like 15 to 20 minutes every day of just like, I'm going to start to work on this paper that I have to write, or I'm going to start to work on this one assignment. And then that way I wouldn't be stressed about it. And I really was able to maintain that. There's also really great resources that they have kind of built within the training program that you can it's like an app on your phone, and you can just do little practice problems, like 5 of them while you're just like waiting in line at the grocery store, or little things like that. And that's how like my brain works. I like to do little chunks. So it wasn't really that, I mean, you definitely have to spend extra time outside of the OR, but I was able to structure it so that I just did a little bit every day. Now, my friend I went through the training program with, she was completely different. She was kind of more, she would just do it all at once. And for her, she would just have to spend like an entire Sunday just catching up on that entire week's assignments, because there is a lot, but like I said earlier, you learn so much, so it really is worth it. So you do have to put a good chunk of time in, definitely, but you can figure out a way to make it work for you. And then that pretty much relates to the work-life balance. So something that I think you'll hear a lot when you first get around people doing this position is that our schedule can be really variable. So it can change a lot. Some days you can finish nice and early, have a good chunk of your day left. Other days you're in the OR all day. So, it can take some getting used to initially, but then you kind of figure out how to structure it. And, I know I'm going to have a day where I can fit in these extra things, but then I'm going to have a day where I won't be able to. And you just kind of have to roll with it, which is something that definitely took some adjusting for me, because especially doing like ballet and double majoring in college, I'm very type A. So I like to have like a schedule and structured things. So you kind of have to learn to let that go. And you just figure out that you'll have time to do those social outings and, you know, other things that are important to you, but you might just have to kind of squeeze them in random spots, and not necessarily like where you think you're not going to be able to like always do something at the same time every day, just because of how much the schedule can fluctuate. And so I mentioned before, I was into ballet. Now I still love being active. I'm really into running. And I just kind of squeeze that in wherever. Sometimes I'll wake up really early to run beforehand, before work. But then if my schedule is I'm starting really early, I'm going to run at night. So like I said, you could still, you know, have that work-life balance. You just have to be flexible with it. So sorry, that was kind of a long answer, but that's kind of my take on it.
No, that's great. I mean, I think sometimes people looking into this can be a little nervous about work-life balance, because the schedule can be so variable from day to day. And so the little details, even just like, when do you run? You know, when do you find time for exercise? No, that's great. Very insightful. I know that when, you know, when I was a new mom, you know, I was kind of like, oh my gosh, there are days where, you know, my day goes really long and I don't get to see my baby as much. But then I thought, well, there are also days where I get to, you know, get off at 1 p.m. or days where maybe I don't have to go in at all. So, you know, kind of the balance worked itself out for me, at least anyways.
And also just to piggyback really quick on the support system, you can always talk to your preceptor, your person who's in the OR with you. And if you're feeling a little overwhelmed on the course, like the didactic portion of the training program, you can talk to them. And sometimes they'll be like, okay, we're going to try and, you know, limit your time in the OR this week so you have a chance to study for these exams coming up. So your preceptor and even your clinical managers, they understand that we have a lot of classwork outside of the OR that we're working on. So they're usually pretty understanding if you can come to them and say, hey, I have these big assignments coming up. Can we kind of limit my time in the OR this week just so I have a little extra time to work on that? And they're usually pretty understanding, or pretty much always very understanding about it.
Yeah. Awesome. Seth, what about you in terms of work-life balance and time for studying outside of the OR?
Well, I would definitely agree with a lot of things Sophia said. So as far as my lifestyle before I started the program, before I started the job, compared to the way it is now, I'm still in the gym all the time, like almost every day. So I somehow managed to work our crazy schedule and do that the entire time I was in the program. So I did a lot like Sophia. I would spend every day doing a little bit, mostly because I wanted to stay ahead of the game on that. I wanted to, you know, if we had assignments coming up or tests coming up or whatever, I wanted to be prepared myself. That was just a personal thing for me. So I took the time. I think you could probably get away with, you know, studying on the weekends sometimes and not necessarily doing as much during the week. But even with our schedule, sometimes doing stuff during the week wasn't, you know, if I worked a 12-hour day and I was in the OR all day, I wasn't going to come home and say, oh, I got to make sure I study all this stuff. I was taking a break. But that being said, sometimes when we're in the hospitals, you know, maybe we're between cases, we're waiting around, not really doing anything. We're all set up, we're ready to go. We can whip out our phones or hop on our computers and answer a few questions here and there. And I thought for me, that helped a lot, because I could, anytime I had downtime, it's like, oh, let me go on Instagram. No, wait, I can just go on this other app, answer questions, learn things, and make sure I'm getting this stuff down. Especially since we do, you know, it's literally what we do every single day. So we needed to know the stuff. So it really helped a lot. But I didn't feel like it does take a little adjustment when you first start, because you're in the OR and you're doing a lot of things. So if you're coming right out of school, it's probably not so bad. But if you're like me, where you're used to just going to your job and coming home, might be a little bit of an adjustment for that work-life balance. But after a little bit of time, you pretty much get used to it, and you kind of, you learn when you can do things and when you can't do things.
Great. The next question I think is also related, but it's a great question because it's very specific. Can people with families succeed in this program? So very much related to the work-life balance. For some people, their life is, children. I'm assuming when you say families, we're talking about young ones, because it can be tough to, schedule drop-offs and pickup times and all this good stuff. I'm not sure if Sophia or Seth are particularly in that seat just yet, but some other folks here certainly have been and are. So just want to hear from you, Sophia, and then Seth, and then Christina and I will probably have a couple of comments on that one as well. Go ahead, Sophia, sorry.
Sure, yeah. So I don't have any little young ones, but I have plenty of coworkers that do. My clinical manager is actually supposed to be having a baby any day now. But in regard to the training program, I think I know that I had peers who had families or kids and they were able to make it work. It's pretty similar to what we were just talking about. I think a big thing is just communicating with, if you have a partner or, grandma or someone that can help, just kind of let them know, hey, listen, like this week's going to be crazy. I'm really going to need, some extra help. Or, hey, I think this week is supposed to be a little bit lighter. Like I can manage X, Y, and Z. So again, I think it kind of just piggybacks on what we were talking about before, that it is variable, and you'll be able to kind of catch up certain days, and other days, definitely you might have to draw on some help. But I do know I had peers that they were able to do it. They definitely said it was challenging. But I had peers who had said they were in grad school before this, and, this wasn't as bad as that. So it is, it's only a year, and it is as we saw earlier today, it's kind of, the program is chunked up. So certain, the beginning, it's the first 2 weeks of school. And, so there's phases of the program. So during certain phases, you're going to have more time for your family, and things outside of work. And then during other times, it's going to be a lot busier. So, but yeah, I don't have kids or a spouse, so I can't talk about it too much, but that's at least my thoughts.
Awesome. What about you, Seth? Just your experiences and observations.
Well, I'm in the same boat. No kids, no family here, but it's kind of like I was saying before. At first it might be a little challenging figuring out, how you're going to deal with it, but over time, as you get used to your work schedule, you're going to come up with ways and times where you're with your family, you're doing, schoolwork, or you're doing actual work in the OR. You're going to be able to find that balance, especially at least with my experience, like the clinical managers understand that you have a responsibility, you have something going on, whether it be your schoolwork for the program or your family, your kids, et cetera, and they'll schedule you appropriately without trying to sort of overwork you. At least with my experience, they, because with the work that we do, it's pretty easy to get overworked and overwhelmed, especially while you're going through the program. So at least again, with my experience, most of the clinical managers I've worked with were happy to be like, oh, you need a little extra time on this day or whatever it is, and they'll work with you.
Yeah, I think you guys both hit on the most important factor being communication, being transparent about what your needs are. And, and we all know that those needs fluctuate. And really, it's not, you ask the question, can people with families succeed? But really, we all have, our trials and tribulations and our, you know, our obstacles and things that we have to juggle, whether you have kids or not, or whether you have, you know, other family members around you that you have to take care of or not. We all have stuff that we have to deal with. So being a better communicator makes you a better employee and makes your life better in the long run, because our managers can kind of help, you know, assist with cooperating, you know, in terms of your schedule. Now, that being said, I will say this, surgeries start really early in the morning, and we have to be at the hospital and prepare for those surgeries, usually about an hour, sometimes even a little bit more ahead of the start time of the surgery. So for example, many times surgeries are scheduled to start at 7:30 a.m. or even 7 a.m., sometimes even 6:30 a.m. So that would mean that we would need to be, so Sophia's like, yep, me too. Okay, so if Sophia is scheduled for a 6:30 a.m. start, that means she needs to be at the hospital ideally at 5:30 a.m. I don't know of a daycare that opens before 5:30 a.m. So that just goes to show you, when we're talking about young ones, or, you know, or an elementary school for that matter, or whatever. So when we're talking about young ones, yes, a support structure, support system is pretty critical in being able to just do the job. We've all been talking about, you know, communicating with managers and having people kind of work with you and flex. But at the end of the day, you know, that can't be, oh, well, I can never do a first start case, you know? So there are certain things that we can be flexible on. There are certain things that are just like, this is how the job is, you know, the job is that many times we have very early mornings. Now, for me personally, I was able to have help from my husband as far as the drop-offs in the morning. So like I said earlier, sometimes it would be pretty late in the evening before I was finished with my clinical day. So that wasn't great, you know, to not get to see my little one on those particular days. But I would really count my blessings when sometimes I would be able to go pick him up, or even have lunch at school, you know, and I would always think, wow, most working moms don't have this opportunity, you know, to kind of have an afternoon together. So it really just depends on what work-life balance, what that term means for you individually. Christina, any last comments on that one?
Sure, I'll chime in. So I'm probably in one of the most unique situations because my husband and I are both surgical neurophysiologists. So for us, that was very challenging when we had children. And I have two kids, one's 7 and one is 3. And, you know, we made the decision before having children that we needed to kind of have all that infrastructure in place to be successful at work and at being parents. So I have grandma who is always kind of ready and willing to fly over and help with our kids. And sometimes, you know, on days that we both go to the operating room early in the morning, grandma comes over and gets them ready and off to school and daycare. But, you know, like, I think I can say, like everyone else says, that there are days that you're done early and there's days that you're done late. So it's just kind of that adjustment of getting used to the variable schedule. Now, the one thing I will add, you know, as part of the apprenticeship training program, you know, and just the beginning of our training program, is that we do require our students to come to Nashville, and it's for a week at a time on 2 different occasions. So usually it's on week 2 and on either week 5 or 6. So that is something that, you know, candidates or people that we extend an offer to have to think about, right? Because you will have to leave your children for a week, and that'll be on 2 different occasions. So, you know, as far as would you be able to do that? You know, a parent of maybe a 3 or 4 month old may have a difficult time leaving for a week, which is completely understandable. But again, can it work? Absolutely. It just depends on the individual and the infrastructure that's in place.
Great. All right, so I think we can shift from the work-life balance side of the talk, and this is actually a lighter side, I suppose, to talk about favorites. So there's a question that says, what was your favorite part about the training program? So that one's kind of fun. So I'll certainly shoot that one to Sophia and Seth. Sophia, go for it.
Okay. So this is kind of hard because I feel like there's a lot of things I could think about. But I don't know. I mean, like I said earlier, I'm big on relationships. And so I feel like you grow really close with the people in your cohort. I mean, we had a whole little group chat and everyone's always, supporting each other about studying, and people would get together and do like Zoom calls, and you'd be like Zooming with like the people in your class, and someone's in Atlanta and someone's in New Jersey, and we'd just be comparing stories, and so that was really fun. And then also like just the relationship that you have with your clinical preceptor, and Julie and Christina, honestly. And then for me, I do want to say also in the beginning, because I started in 2020, we had to do some Zoom lectures. And so there was one thing where we have to place some of the needles, as Christina was explaining how we can do IONM, we have to place some needles at the patient's head. And so to kind of get familiar with the anatomy of the head and where you're going to place those needles, we had a foam head that was mailed to each of us. So I don't know if this is still currently happening, but at least for me, since of the time frame that I was in the training program, and we had to practice marking it up with Julie during like an online learning session. And then we were trying to like hold our foam heads up to the webcam and show her and be like, is this good? Is this good placement? And I don't know, I just thought it was really funny. But all in all, I'd probably say like the relationships you build with your coworkers and the people you go through the training program with, as well as the people helping you. That's it for me.
Cool. What about you, Seth?
Well, so because I at least started my training during like sort of the end of the chaos of COVID, I only got to go to Nashville one of those 2 weeks. So I think one of my favorite parts was going to Nashville, and it was kind of like Sophia's saying, because I got to be able to get together with the whole group. Everybody got to come together. We sat in the hotel conference room studying together. We had a blast. We went out to get food and everything together. It was a good time. But I think it's a tie between that and finishing the CNM and getting that notification that I passed that test, and I was finally pretty much almost all the way done with the whole program. It was like the biggest sigh of relief ever.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, and that's something we should probably highlight too is, national board certification is national board certification. It's not an internal recognition. So that's something to really be proud of, and it's very, very valuable, a very valuable aspect of the program. So very cool. All right. I think that just about wraps us up for our Meet the Recent Grads. So thanks you guys so much. Let's see, we still have plenty of attendees online with us. So we're just going to keep it rolling. You guys let me know if you see any other questions pop in there about, or specifically geared toward the recent grads. But I think we're just going to go ahead and move on to the Meet the Educators component. So Christina Young and I are we're basically co-directors, if you will. So we're the directors of the training program. Specifically, I'm the director of our education and training aspect, and Christina Young technically is our director of clinical development. I started my career about 15 years ago with a smaller IONM company and just continued to kind of grow and learn with them. And that company was actually purchased by SpecialtyCare in 2012. So that is how I joined SpecialtyCare. And so it was really here at the beginning of kind of figuring out what this training program was going to look like and really formalizing it. So our first formal cohort went through in 2013. And and now really in my role today, when we bring new cohorts of individuals to come train with us, I technically am the hiring manager. So I do most of the like administrative stuff, the onboarding, get everybody kind of oriented, and then I'm kind of the main face of the program for the first couple weeks. And then we shift to clinical manager reporting. So I help to transition all of the students to then report to their local clinical managers while they continue to get ongoing training. And so I'll kick it over to Christina for her intro. Christina Young and I, again, work really close together throughout the training program, but she really oversees more of the latter phases of training, whereas I'm kind of heavy on the front phase. Christina.
Hello. So I started my career at Intraoperative Neuromonitoring about 15 years ago as well. After going through a training program myself, I moved to South Florida and I began working as a surgical neurophysiologist in the Fort Lauderdale area. Then I moved into a clinical management role, and I managed a couple of different territories in South Florida. So West Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami. And I did this for a couple of years. And it's funny because the way that I got into education and training is that I actually started training some local surgical neurophysiologists in my area at a library to get them prepared for taking their board exam. And this was a very, very long time ago. And we didn't have a formal board preparation at the time. So that was kind of how I landed myself into a promotion into an educative role. I was working for a company, a different IOM company that was acquired by SpecialtyCare in 2016. And Julie and Cheryl were already on the education team at that time. So at 2016 is when I joined into their IOM education family here at SpecialtyCare. So as Julie mentioned, she and I are co-directors. We work very, very closely with the SM1 training program. I do live in South Florida still, unlike Julie, who is in our Nashville area. But for each of our training classes that we host, those cohorts, when they come to Nashville, I also come to Nashville for a couple of days each time. And then when our students move through different phases, Julie and I kind of, well, I wouldn't say that we kind of shift the hat back and forth. Well, we kind of do that on a daily basis, but overall, she kind of takes control of phase one mostly, and we kind of share phase two. And in phase three, I do a majority of the teaching for our CNIM board preparation. So, in a nutshell, the two of us just work very, very closely together and kind of lead the students through that first year up until they achieve their board certification, and then finish off strong with a final capstone. And then at that point, any of our surgical neurophysiologists can continue to ascend and advance their career based on their motivation.
Awesome.
You guys, thank you for that introduction. I know we want to be able to get some questions from our audience for you as well. So as Julie's mentioned before, please keep the questions coming in to the Q&A panel, or also if you wanted to raise your hand, you can do that as well. But one of the questions that I already see, and Julie, I guess we'll start with you. What are, you guys both have been part of this program for a very long time. You've interviewed many, many candidates. You've seen successful candidates and you've seen not successful candidates. So what are some of the qualities that really do make students successful for our program or a program set up like ours?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So many different qualities. I think if I had to choose one major one, I think grit, I guess, would be the name for it. Just the ability to overcome and persevere in the face of obstacles. I always tell students, a common question that people ask is, what's the hardest part? What's the biggest challenge? And I always tell students, you're going to face your own unique challenges. Sometimes people think that the didactic, the academic work is just the toughest thing in the world, but then they get into the operating room and, they can plug stuff in and they can talk to surgeons, no problem. Other people may find speaking with neurosurgeons to be very scary and, anxiety provoking, and maybe the didactic stuff comes a bit easier for them. So it's always going to be your own unique challenge, but whatever it is that you're facing, you got to get through it. And, you know, having grit really requires patience. It requires courage. You have to be courageous to be willing to mess up in front of people and say the wrong answer a few times, but then come back the next day, you know, and try again. So I think that would be my main answer to that one.
That's a great one. And I would have to agree that would be, that's a star quality in someone that can really let them achieve very high outcomes in a program like ours. Would you add anything else, Christina?
I mean, I would probably mirror the same thing that Julie just said. The only other thing that I could say, you know, what we look for in interviews too are communication skills that people possess. And, you know, of course, the didactic and the training and all of that is difficult, it's challenging. And, you know, most of our students do thrive, of course, but it's not easy for everyone, and it's definitely takes a lot of perseverance to get through. But then once you're that face in the operating room, you know, you have to have really good communication skills and confidence. You're speaking to surgeons, you're speaking to anesthesiologists, you're making requests, you're speaking about the patient's neurological system during surgery. So a lot of what makes people successful in the long run, so not just in the training program, but in the long run, are having those, you know, kind of higher education, higher communication skills to be, you know, very useful in the operating room.
No, I would agree with that as well. I think, you know, whether it's, and I like where your brain went with that, Christina, because whether it's the training program or whether it's being successful in this career long term, I don't think it is very different, right? It's many of the same skill sets. I would add that the ability to multitask. So not that it's that easy, you know what I mean? Not that that's like a black and white kind of answer, but the ability to keep all of those things going at the same time, as Julian mentioned. You wear a lot of hats when you're in there. And both Julie and Christina alluded to the fact that you're there to convey trust, you're there to communicate. You're there to provide, you know, and be the face of SpecialtyCare's intraoperative neuromonitoring at that point in time. Meaning you fulfill a lot of roles. You're a care provider, you're a customer service provider to the hospital, to the surgeon. And you have to be able to kind of multitask through all of that, as well as represent the organization. And sometimes I think it's easy to forget that all of those things are part of what we teach in the training program of how to successfully do that. And that's why it's laid out the way that it is. So it is, you know, it's unfortunately not one of those easy things for somebody to say, hey, I'm a really good multitasker. I can keep this plate spinning at the same time as that plate spinning. And being happy with that, right? Because that's the other component, is you have to be able to be fulfilled in kind of that aspect of this job, or it does make it really difficult to want to be successful. Okay, another question. Christina, can you go a little bit more into the process of preparing people for board certification?
Absolutely. So once our students move through phases 1 and 2, they'll start phase 3, which is when we begin to prepare for the CNIM exam. So at SpecialtyCare, we have a 10-week program, and it consists of a couple of different ways to learn. But the program starts out with learning modules. So the modules take about an hour and a half to 2 hours to go through. They're on specific topics, and at the end of taking the module, you take a quiz. And that helps to reinforce the learning. And this type of basically, we're giving all that information, everything that the student needs to know for the board exam through these modules, and then quizzing them. At week 4 is when we start to slow down on the modules, and we kind of ramp up using that app that we mentioned before. We have the students using the app in phases 1, 2, and 3, but this helps to reinforce the learning. We also have live webinars. We do the live webinars on the evenings once a week between 5 and 7 p.m. Central Time, where all the students will log on, and we go through a bunch of different IOM topics for the board exam. And it's very interactive between me and all the students. Also, Julie leads one of those webinars as well, where she gives tips and tricks to taking the board exam. At the very end of the program, so near the 10-week mark, is when we do practice exams. So we have 3 different practice exams that the students can take. I look at those scores, and based on the scores that the student gets, either do one-on-one with me before taking the exam, or I give them that stamp that they're ready to test. So somewhere near the middle of the program, the student applies for the exam and gets their ready to test email from ABRET. And then can select a test date from that point until 3 months out. So once the student's ready, they'll apply and take the exam. But of course, you know, my biggest goal, Julie's biggest goal, is that 100% of our students pass the exam. So if I feel that someone's not ready based on their final exam scores, then I kind of have them hold off on scheduling until closer to that 2 or 3 month mark, so that we can work more one-on-one to make sure they're prepared.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And looking through, it looks like some questions have started to dwindle down. I think we've gotten to most of them. I just looking back to make sure that we didn't miss any from before. I did see a question coming in specifically asking for access to the app that both Sophia and Seth referred to. That is only for students within the program. It's not something that it's not like an iPhone app, that meaning that any of the general public can go grab. So apologies, we won't be able to share that. But if you do come into the program, it is something that you would get access to at that point in time. And then the only other one I saw, it looks like we got another question specific to the international students. So in case you weren't on earlier, do reach out to Brittany specifically. The visa situations are not straightforward. So it's not something that we can always do. We have had international students, but it's very different depending on which visas and things like that. So please do reach out directly to Brittany, and she can talk through any of those specifics if you have questions. Julie, Christina, anything else does anybody else see anything that we missed in the Q&A panel or anything else? Other than that, I think we may be close to the end.
No, I don't see anything else. I would just encourage our attendees to, enter any last minute questions. And if not, if you think of them later, go ahead and email them to us.
All right.
All right.
Well, fantastic. And once again, happy National Apprenticeship Week, everybody, to our graduates, to our participants today, and to this whole team that's online. So much appreciated.
Yeah, awesome. Good luck to all of you guys. And just don't forget, if you're ready to submit your application, you can use this QR code to go to our website. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, all.
Everyone.
Bye. Thanks, guys.